Let's go ahead and give it a second to finish loading. So here it goes, we're fading in. And there it is, it says new game. So that we know that works. We loaded brand new into our custom story for the first time, and it shows new game as we anticipated. So what we're gonna do is we're gonna hit new game here, and under original, we're gonna hit start, and we're just gonna start our custom story now. So now if we leave here, since we loaded into this map, we updated that config to chapter 1 as you guys saw. So we're gonna go ahead and hit exit and go back to the main menu. And now that when we grab what's that config for chapter, you can see at the bottom right, it says chapter 1. So hey guys, it's Deco Freak here, and welcome to episode 46 of my custom story creation tutorial for Amnesia Rebirth. And today we're gonna be talking about config files. So config files are a perfect way to go ahead and store data that you have and access it at any point in your custom story across any different levels that you're at. And it makes it a very useful tool to store certain information that you need across multiple levels. And also, you can also edit any configurations related to video, graphics, like controls and stuff. You can edit any of those settings that are in the options when you pause the game. So it's a great way to change settings and tweak it if you need it, or if you're making some kind of troll level, you can like change the player's resolution all of a sudden, and I guess it'd be pretty funny as well. But you can definitely do a lot with it. So let's go ahead and get started on today's episode. This is a bit of a lead up to I wanted to do a main menus part 3 where we do a few extra upgrades on our main menu. But this is a topic I wanted to cover before we get there, as it could be a bit confusing if you don't really understand it previously. So let's go ahead and start it. So first thing we want to do, I'm here in my main menu script for our main menu. And what I want to do is go ahead and create our config file. So we're going to create a global variable in our map here, so that we can then save our config file too. So what we're going to do here is make a couple new lines here. I'm going to put it outside of our any of our functions here. We're going to put it outside here, just like we would any global variable. And what we're going to do, you can go ahead and copy along here. We'll put brackets here. We're going to say volatile, and then we're going to go ahead and hit a space, and we're going to say C config file, and we're going to put at the end of it here. So we're going to say at, and then we're going to say, and then now we're going to give the variable a name. So we're going to go ahead and just call it MP config. This is generally what the devs call it when they create the variable. So that's why I'm going to call it MP config. But you can call it whatever you want. You don't have to call it MP config. But again, I'm just kind of copying the way that developers tend to do this. So it's going to be MP config here. Then to explain this a little bit, we're creating a class of type C config file. And then what we're doing, this part here that says volatile just indicates that this data can change suddenly, and because it can change suddenly and rapidly, we want to make sure that the program knows that we're going to be changing this information sporadically, possibly. It's more of a programming thing, but since this file technically will be changing constantly, we want to make sure we set volatile here. So make sure you do that. And now what we're going to do is in our void setup method here, we're going to create some new space here. And what we're going to do is we're going to call this variable here. So we're going to put at MP config. That's going to be with a capital C. And we're going to say equals, and then we're going to get the actual config file. So we're going to say clux underscore get user config right here. You need to provide any other information, just put a semicolon at the end here. So now this will actually go and grab the config file and save it to our variable that we created here. So now we have actually loaded into our main menu script here the actual config file. So let's talk about where is this config file that I'm talking about here. So the config file is actually in your documents folder. So if you go to, I'm going to go back here a few folders here. So in your documents folder, you'll have a folder called My Games, assuming you've launched Rebirth at least once. And in the My Games folder, you have the Rebirth folder. And then here you'll have two folders. This is the actual main folder for Amnesia Rebirth if you played the main game. If you played any mods, you have a new folder here called Mods with the config files for all the custom stories that you've played before. And as you can see, since we've played our custom story once before, we have our folder here called The Wake. And if we go in here, here's all the configuration data. So to kind of explain this here, the config that we just loaded in here is going to be the one that has user settings at the end. So if we launch the game in from our CodeLight application, it's going to be in developer mode. So it creates a file called dev underscore and then user settings. So this only appears because we launched it in dev mode. If we launch the game in no Steam mode, so if we were to go to the root directory here and then launch the game here where it says Amnesia Rebirth no Steam, it's not going to open up your Steam. It's just going to load you with like a default profile, and the settings for that is going to be saved right here under default underscore user settings. And if you to start up your game from your Steam game, like from your Steam library, it's going to load with your Steam profile, and you'll see something with like your Steam name. It's going to have your Steam name, and then I could probably show you guys kind of what that looks like back here. If we go main, it's just going to show you your profile name and stuff, and that's where you'll see that. So you'll see something like that. So here we're going to be launching it in dev mode. I think we'll near the end also launch it in the default mode as well. But mainly the one that we're looking at here is going to be this dev user settings because we are launching the game in dev mode. And if we go in here, we can see what the config file has stored in it. And you can see some interesting stuff in here. For example, we have like the screen width and the screen height. If we look more, we can find some other interesting things here, like show subtitles right here, and and you have some other stuff around here. Some things related to graphics as well, some input stuff like invert mouse and stuff. So definitely some good information here. We can actually edit any of this info, and we will do that so I can show you guys kind of what like that looks like. And we will also add information to the config file and retrieve it whenever we want. So this is pretty good stuff that we can do when we start messing around with this config file, because we know everything about the configuration of our mod in when the player is playing it or in any instance. So this is going to be very good to know. So let's go ahead and actually start messing around with this config file now. So let's go back here to our main menu, and what we're going to do is we're going to go ahead and just try to get some information and just kind of print it out onto the screen. So what we're going to do is we're going to go a couple new lines here. And what I want to do is just kind of print out some information. So I want to just show you guys that we can retrieve any information in the config file. So what I want to do to get the information, the way you do it is you say mp config. So we'll say mp config, we'll say dot, and we'll say get, and let's get the screen. Let's get the screen width and the screen height. So we're gonna say get, and we want to get whatever type it is. So if we go back to the config file here, I think I closed it. We'll go ahead and open it again. So if we look here, we have a number here. This is an integer because there's no .00 or anything like that after it. This is just an integer. Something like this, like volume, is 1.0000. This is another fun one that you could change in the game if you're trying to like jump scare somebody or something like that, and you want to make sure their volume is maxed out or something. This is something you could change here. This is a float. And then you have other stuff here. This is another integer. This is a boolean. I'm sure there's some strings or something here, but yeah, there's a bunch of different types of variables in here. Because this one has no .00 at the end of it or anything like that, this is an integer and this one as well. So if we want to get the width and the height, These are integers. So what we're going to do is we're going to say mpconfig.get, and we're going to say int. So now we need to provide 3 variables here. First, it's going to be the category name. Then it's going to be the actual value you're looking for. And then this I'll explain in a moment. We'll just put 0 here for now, and we'll close it out with a semicolon. But let's explain these variables that we're going to put in here. So for the first section here, if we go back to the config file, so everything is in categories here. We have a category called game, a category called debug, a category called input, map, main, map load, sound, and screen here. So if we're looking for width or height, we're going to go into the screen category. So that's going to be the first variable here is going to be screen. And then if we go back here, if we want, for example, width, this is a actual value within the screen category. So we want to go ahead and say width for the second value here. So we're going to say width. And now the last number here, when you're getting a variable, this last value here is actually pointless. You don't need to put this. You obviously don't know what is inside of this inside of these quotations here for the integer or whatever it is. You can just specify any random integer. It has to be an integer since we are getting an int. This has to be an int, but it doesn't matter what you put here. You can put 0, you can put 100, you can put 2000. It doesn't matter. Just put any random number. It's actually just ignored. So if we were to, so this itself is going to get us whatever's inside of the category screen that has the name width. So we should get this value right here, 1920. So our width will be 1920. And we can again copy the same thing here to go ahead and get the height. If we put height right here, of course we want to be able to visualize this. So let's just print it as a debug message in our dev mode, so we can actually see the info. So I'm going to just jump another couple lines here, and I'm going to say clux_add debug message so that we can have it as a debug message. These are integers. It is a number. So since it is a number, we can't just put it in here and it'll print out. We have to change it to a string first. So the way we do that is we say cstring toString, and then inside of this toString function, we can go ahead and put this whole thing here. So what we're going to do is we're going to go ahead and cut this here, and we're going to paste it here. And then we're going to do the same thing and we're going to close out first with a semicolon at the end, and we'll just copy this and paste it right here. We'll clean this up here, and then we'll just change this here to height. So again, all we're doing is printing out a debug message. Since this is going to return an integer, we have to print it as a string. So we're going to say toString to change this into a string and then print it on the screen. So now that we have that, let's go ahead and start up our main menu map here and check it out and see what it looks like. So I already have my game open here. So we'll just hit F1 here. We'll go map, we'll go load map, and then we'll just go. Remember, you can just go to maps and load up the dev's main menu. It will redirect to your own main menu. So we're going to open up the main menu here. We'll hit F1. Again, this is our little intro we made in the last episode, but I don't know if you noticed we had numbers down here. Let me actually restart here. I'm going to hit F5 to restart. And if you see down here, you can see 1920 by 1080. So that's our height and our width that we just grabbed from the config file. So as you saw, we were able to retrieve the information from our config file and print it. So what does this mean? So that means that we can actually take this information, look at it, and change it if it doesn't match what we want it to be, right? So what we're going to do here for this example, what I'm going to do is I'm going to check what the screen resolution is, and if it is equal to 1920 by 1080, like it is right now, we'll change the screen to something else, and we can demonstrate how we can change the config file. So what we're going to do here, let's get our if statement in here. Let's say if parentheses, and then we'll put our curly braces here. And then what we want to do is check, we're going to check these values here. So I'm going to copy just this part in here, the get int part. So we're going to paste that right here. So we're going to go ahead and do mpconfig.getInt screen width. So we're going to get the width. If the width is equal to, so we're going to say equals 1920. So we're checking to see if that integer is equal to 1920. And so we'll do a double ampersand here. We'll say and. Then we're going to go ahead and copy this one right here. We'll paste it right here. And mpconfig.getInt height is equal. So we'll go ahead and do this thing here. Equals. And we'll say 1080. So if the width is equal to 1920 and the height is equal to 1080, which means that the player is in 1920 by 1080, that is the resolution of my monitor. Then we're going to go ahead and do something. And what is it that we're going to do here? Well, what we're going to do is we're going to go ahead and change the screen resolution to something else. So the way we edit this config file is by saying mpconfig.setInt. So it's an int, we're going to say setInt. And now in here, we're going to specify the same information, right? So we're going to let's change the screen width first. So we'll say screen, comma, and we're going to say width. And now this last value actually has a purpose here. This last value we want to is the value that we're going to change it to now. So for setting, the third value here is very important. For getting, not so much. It's going to pretty much ignore whatever the third value is. So what do we want to change it to? Let's change it to 800. And then we'll change the height to be 600. So it's going to be an 800 by 600 resolution, a 4:3 resolution. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to do the same thing. I'm just going to copy this. And instead of width, of course, we want height. And we're going to change that to 600. Not 60, 600. And we're going to go ahead and save that. So now if we go ahead and restart our main menu, we can have a look at it. But there's one important thing. If we run this now, nothing's going to happen. It's not going to happen because we haven't told the config file to update with our changes here. So what we need to do is down here we need to put a message, a function. We're going to run a function to get the config to update. So what we're going to say is c lux underscore, and we're going to say apply user config. So we're going to reapply whatever the config file has right now, and this will actually so we'll update it here, and then we'll tell the game to go ahead and apply whatever the config is at the moment. Go ahead and apply it to the screen. So now let's go ahead and refresh our game here. We'll hit F5, and what should happen is when I refresh here, we should get the screen to immediately change to 800 by 600. So let's go ahead and hit F5 here. So I hit F5, and look at that. Our resolution is now set to 4:3, 800 by 600, and obviously you can't click outside of this radius here. So yep, that's how you change it to 800 by 600. And again, you don't have to just do it with screen width and screen height. You can do any variable, any variables inside of that config file that you want. So now let's go ahead and keep rolling with this and just kind of try some other things. So I'm going to change this to I'm going to go ahead and just change it to 1920 by 1080 to get my screen back here. So we're going to head and just cut this out, and we'll paste it here, and I'll leave this on screen in case you guys need it, but it's not going to do anything. And we'll go ahead and just leave those there. So we want to make sure the screen is set to 1920 by 1080 when we start up. And we can just go ahead and erase these functions right here. All right, so now that we have that done, let's talk about some other ones. So let's talk about how we can get Boolean variables. So it's going to be very similar for all of these going forward now, especially if you understand this one. But we're going to do a get Boolean, which again, a Boolean, remember, is a Boolean is a true or false variable. It's either true or it's either false. So we're going to get it. So I think what we're going to do is we have a value called inverse mouse here. So I think I'm going to do this and just kind of like inverse the player's mouse and see if that works. So let's go ahead and do that. Remember that is under the category input, and the value is invert mouse. So what we're going to do is we're going to do an if statement just like this one here. We're going to say if, and we'll do our usual curly brace and stuff, parentheses, and we're going to say mpconfig dot, and we're going to say get bool. So we're going to get our boolean variable here. And again, that was the input category. We're going to say comma space, and it was invert mouse. And again, that has to be in quotation marks. So we'll go ahead and put that inside of quotation marks. And remember, it doesn't matter what this third variable is when you're getting the value, because it's not gonna, here you have to still put a boolean. You can see the value it's requiring here is a boolean variable, but you have to provide one of those. But it doesn't matter what you put, it's just gonna give you whatever the value is in the config. So I'm just gonna put true. Again, it doesn't matter what you put here, because what it's going to do is going to give you this value. So despite us putting true, it's just going to give you false anyways, because that is what we have set in our config file at the moment. So, if what we want to do is, if it's not true, if our inverse mouse is not true, because it's already set to false. If it's not true, we want to set it to be true. So we know it's going to return false because in the config it's set to false right now. So we're going to say if not. Remember, if you put an exclamation point in the front of this whole statement here, you're doing the opposite. So if invert mouse is not true, then we can go ahead and do whatever we want here. So since it is not true, because it's false, we know it's false, we're going to go ahead and set it to true. So now we're going to do something just like we did up here. We're going to say mpconfig, and we're going to say dot, and we're going to say set bool. So we're going to set the boolean variable now. We're going to put the same info that's up here. We're going to say input. We're going to say invert mouse. We'll do comma space. And now this is, remember, this is setting it. So this is actually what we want to do to it. So we're going to go ahead and say true. So we are setting this to be true. And we will go ahead and close this out with a semicolon. So we are changing this now to be true. So let's go ahead and test it. Again, make sure CLux apply user config is right below it. And let's go ahead and test it out. So we'll go ahead and hit F5 here to refresh our game here. And we won't notice it here in the main menu because we don't have the control of the player yet. And in the main menu, you actually don't invert it. I believe we go to options though, you can see it. If we go to controls, yeah, you can see invert mouse Y is set to on. So you can see that worked. So what we're gonna do just to check it, I don't think I'll be able to show you guys anyways. We'll just start a new game here and load into my custom story. And once we load in, I can just move around the mouse and just confirm that it works. Again, you guys won't be able to see it, but I can kind of mess around with it. So here I am, I'm looking up and down here. So right now I'm moving my mouse up and I went down, and I'm moving my mouse down now and it went up. So you can see it is inverted here. And now let's go ahead and go back here to our file here. We confirm that we made successful changes to the mouse. Again, pretty fun thing to mess with a player if you want the player to have inverted controls. Or maybe you somehow made some kind of a car in the game and you need like controls to be inverted or something on demand. This is one way you can do it. You can do it to the config file. Although I think there's some functions to change that kind of stuff too. But for now, this is a pretty good example of how you can mess around with the config file here. So now let's talk about another example. Let's talk about a get float. So we're gonna get a float. Again, just another example to show you guys. What we'll do is we'll leave this as is here. Actually, we'll leave the inverse mouse control, sure. And now what I'm going to show you guys is changing a float. So it's going to be the same business as these right here. So I'm going to try and go through this one quickly. I think I'm going to change the FOV here. So let's go ahead and check what the FOV is here. So I believe FOV is under gameplay. So is under gameplay, but I don't see a gameplay category here. It's probably because the player has not set a FOV. So if we go here, we go to and we go to display, and we say, let's just say we change FOV or something to like actually no, let's change FOV to let's change FOV to 79, and we'll go back and we'll hit apply, and we'll go ahead and go back, and you can see we're like super zoomed in now because we changed the FOV to be very, very short. So we're gonna go ahead and go in here, and if we let's try to reload this now, reload our file here now. So as you can see, since we changed it, now we have a new config file. A new config here. Gameplay FOV is currently set to 50. Let's go ahead and just change this to like 100. And remember, since there are a bunch of zeros, there's a dot and a bunch of zeros, this is a float that we're working with here. So we're going to do our usual if statement again. And what we're going to do is we're going to go ahead and say mp config.get float. And then again, the category was gameplay, and we'll do comma, space, and the value was FOV in caps. So we'll do that. And again, when we're getting it, it doesn't matter what the third variable is. So I'm just going to put 0.0f as long as it is the correct type. So you see it asks for a float here. So we need to put a float in there. And so if get float, of course we need to do something with this. This is not a boolean like this one. So if we're gonna get the float, and if it is, let's say, not equal to, so we'll say not equals. If it's not equal to, I don't know, 100, 100.0. So if the user's FOV is not 100 right now, let's go ahead and change it to 100. So we're gonna go ahead and do the same business here. We're gonna say config here dot, and we're gonna say set, and we're gonna say set float, and we're gonna put in the same info as before. We're gonna say gameplay, and we're gonna say comma space FOV comma space, and now remember, this is the actual value you want to set it to. This value does matter. We want to change it to 100, so we go ahead and update the FOV setting to 100. So so now that that's done, let's go ahead and restart our game here. So we need to go to, remember this is in our main menu script, so we need to go into our main menu. So I'm going to go ahead and load back into our main menu here. And if we come in, here we are in the main menu, and the FOV is not zoomed in anymore. I don't know if you can tell right off the bat, but we can go to options, we can go to display, we can bring this back to 79 here. We can apply here, and you can see we're very zoomed in here on our image here. If we hit F5 again to reset, you can see our FOV got changed back to 100 here, and we're back zoomed out again. So we successfully changed the FOV here. So now that we have that all done, we can actually mess around with some stuff even more. What I'm going to do is I'm going to comment out some of the other changes we did here. We can actually just get rid of these two. Actually, I don't know why I bothered moving these here. We can just go ahead and put these in here now. So you guys can see all the code we've done so far. I just commented them out so they don't actually execute. Now we're going to talk about the last and probably the more important part, how you can actually insert your own variables into the config file, how we can create our own variables and put them in the config file. So remember guys, if you change any of these values here and you kind of want, and you're like testing it and you need to reset it, you come in here into this folder here, and or not this folder, the documents folder that I showed you in the beginning, your my games, Amnesia, Rebirth, mods, the wake folder, or whatever your custom story is called, and you can just delete this file here and your configs will be all wiped off. This is what it is now, of course, but obviously you can wipe it off if by just deleting this config file here if you need a reset. So let's go ahead and talk about now how to update, how to create our own string now, our own value in there. What we're going to do is we're going to insert a string that we want to put in our config file. Of course, you can create any value you want. But for the demonstration here, we're going to create a string. So we're going to say mp config, and we're going to say dot, and we're not getting nothing. All we're going to do is going to say set string. And what we're going to do is we're going to put it under the main category, and we're going to put it under a value called, let's call it chapter. Say chapter. And what I want this to be is I want this to track what chapter the player is in our story, in our custom story. Like he completed like the first level, or he's in the first level, so he's in chapter 1. And if he moves on to the next chapter in our custom story, we can update this at some point to like chapter 2 or something like that. So I want to keep track of what chapter the player is currently playing in my custom story right now. So we're gonna set the value to be chapter 1. And we're gonna go ahead and save that. So if the value does not exist and we're setting the value, it's just gonna add it to our config file as chapter 1, as whatever we set in here. So remember, this is a set string. We did a set string. So remember, a string is just like a bunch of characters, it could just be like chapter 1. It's like words. You could put anything you want. I'm gonna put chapter 1 in here, and since this won't exist because there is no category for that, I mean, here's the main. We know the main category exists, but there is no variable at the moment for chapter. So it's going to go ahead and create it for us in our config file. So let's go ahead and test this out. But before we test this out, we actually cannot use this apply user config, because this is mainly used for when you're updating the config file with something in like the configuration screen, in the options screen. If it's not in the options screen and it's outside of the options screen, then you have to save this data a different way. So the way you save this is you say mp config.save. And we'll close that with a semicolon. So remember, if we're adding our own unique values or updating unique values that aren't in the options screen, we have to hit mp. We have to say mp config.save. If we're editing config stuff like this, like screen width, invert mouse, FOV, you can use this one. But if you're updating ones that aren't in the options screen, you have to use mp config.save. So now that we have that there, let's go ahead and test it out. But we want to, of course, print this message out somehow. So what I'm going to do, this part, I'm not going to explain too much. This is just for demonstration purposes. But we will be talking about showing messages on screen and stuff like that in the next one. We'll be talking about GUIs in the next episode. So some of this might make sense more in the next episode. But I'm just going to drop this on GUI function here. And I'm not going to explain too much what this does, but we're going to print the label onto the screen. And I already set the position of where I want it here. But again, I'm not going to explain too much what any of this does right now. This is just for demonstration. And what I'm going to do is here, you can see I already have some information here, but I'm going to clear this out and just kind of explain it. So the first section here of this IAM GUI do label is the string that we want to print out on screen. And that message I want to print out on screen is going to be the value that we just set right here. So we're going to say mp config. So from our config file, we're going to go ahead and grab a string. So we're going to say get string. And we're going to grab the string that we just added brand new to our config file, which is going to be chapter. And again, it doesn't matter what you put here in this third value, because it's just going to get whatever it's set to in the config. So I'm going to put quotation marks here. It's going to be blank like this. And then we're going to go ahead and start up the game now and see what this looks like. So let's go ahead and open this up. I'm going to hit F5 here to refresh it here. And you can see in the bottom right, it says chapter 1. So again, I printed the message on the screen, but we set this value to be chapter 1. Let's go ahead and go out of our game here, and let's go to the config file. I'm going to close this and reopen it again since we did update it. And if we go right here to the main section here, we start scrolling to right. At the very end, you see chapter. I kind of zoomed past it, but chapter 1, there's our value that we just added, brand new, wasn't here before. We went ahead and added it here, and now we can grab this whenever we want. So that's the beauty of saving this stuff to the config file. You can grab this info wherever you want. So now here's what we're gonna do. We're gonna go ahead and make this not start. Of course, if we just put chapter 1 here when the main menu sets up, it's always going to be chapter 1. How can we communicate between the levels? So let's talk about how we can do that. So what we're going to do here is I'm going to go ahead and hit some new space here. What I'm going to say is if. We're going to do an if statement here. And what we're going to do is we're going to do the same thing here, right? But we're going to do a get. We're going to get. So we're going to say mpconfig.get string, and we're going to get the same info above, main, and we're going to say chapter. We're going to say chapter, and we're going to say we're going to put this thing. And remember, this doesn't matter at the end here because we're getting a value. We're going to get whatever is in there regardless. So we don't need to put anything there. So we're going to get the string. I'm going to clear this out here for a moment. I'm going to put it in here. I want to explain why we're doing that in a moment. But, okay, so we're going to get the string. And what we're going to do is we're going to check what the string is set to right now. If we haven't set it before, we haven't set anything to indicate that this is chapter 1 or anything like that, then this is just going to return a blank string here. So if we go ahead and we get this string here, chapter, main chapter, and it doesn't exist in our config file, we're going to get a blank string here. So what that means is this is how we can check if we need to create this value for us here. So since it's blank, we know it doesn't exist, and we can go ahead and create it here. So what I'm actually going to do is I'm going to call it chapter 1. Let's just say the player started up a brand new game, and here we go in our code. We check if main chapter is equal to blank, which means that it doesn't exist. It is equal to blank, so that means it doesn't exist. So what we're going to do now is we're going to say mpconfig file.setString, and we're going to set this to new game because we know the player just started up their game brand new for the first time into our or not the game itself, but our custom story specifically for the first time because they are in our main menu here. So we know it is the new game now. So we know it's blank. Now it's new game. So now that's where we set it to. And here, when we get it, we know it's going to be new game. But now let's say we want to update this so that when the player starts playing the game for the first time, it changes to like chapter 1 or something, right? So that would happen when we load into the first level of chapter 1. So let's say we have our other map here called starting room, and let's say this is chapter 1 when the player loads into this level. So how can we update the config file to reflect that? So what we're going to do is we're going to load up our config here in our starting room script file here. And what we're going to do is we're going to go here and we're going to copy the same thing we did when we first set up our main menu in the beginning of the video. So I'm just going to copy. All right, we need volatile, we need our config. Then we need to go ahead and get the config itself. So let's do that. Before we do anything else here, let's do the config stuff. So we're going to go ahead and save the config here. We're going to go ahead and then change the config here to be what we want. So we're going to go ahead and go down here. And now here we're going to change it to chapter 1. So we're setting now the config for main chapter to be chapter 1. And of course we need to apply this. So we're going to go ahead and hit mpconfig.save. Here, remember, if we're updating values that might not exist, we need to hit mpconfig.save. And that will go ahead and, so when the player first loads into the game here, he's going to just get new game. He's just going to get a message called new game because we saw that it was blank and we changed it to new game. And that's what's going to print out here when we put the label. But after the player starts the game for the first time and loads into our first level here, starting room, we're changing it to chapter 1, and we're going to update it and save it. So now we're going to do, I'm actually going to have to exit out of the game here So I'm going to exit the game here, and I'm going to actually start it in regular default mode. So that's going to be this default user settings mode right here. So I don't want the old config that I had for this. I'm going to go ahead and delete it here. And now what I'm going to do is I'm going to go to the root directory of Amnesia, and I'm going to go ahead and start up my game in no Steam mode. This is the default profile mode. So we're going to go ahead and start it up. And again, just to kind of recap what we did, first we checked to see if it was blank. Then if it is blank, we set it to new game. So when we load into our custom story main menu for the first time, what we're going to see is new game, because that's what we set it to, because we saw it was blank. Then when we load into the our first level, we're going to see that it's going to update, and then we're going to go back to the main menu, and it's going to be updated to chapter 1 now, because we updated it in our main menu. So let's go ahead and go custom stories. We'll go ahead and start up my custom story here. So now here we are starting back up to my custom story. So my custom story is starting up now, and it's going to play the main menu right off the bat, and we're going to see our new game message at the bottom right. So let's go ahead and give it a second to finish loading. So here it goes, we're fading in. And there it is. It says new game. So that we know that works. We loaded brand new into our custom story for the first time, and it shows new game as we anticipated. So what we're going to do is we're going to hit new game here, and under original, we're going to hit start, and we're just going to start our custom story now. So now we're going to load into our starting room map that we had previously, that we already had set up already. So here it goes. We're loading into our first map, and that's the same map where we updated the config file to be chapter 1 now. So here we are in my level now. So now if we leave here, since we loaded into this map, we updated that config to chapter 1 as you guys saw. So we're gonna go ahead and hit exit and go back to the main menu. And now that when we grab what's that config for chapter, you can see at the bottom right, it says chapter 1. So we've successfully updated that chapter here by using a config file. So that's good stuff. And with that, pretty much wraps up the end of the video today. We will touch on this a little more when we do main menus part 3, I think in a couple episodes. So stay tuned for that. We're going to use, as a preview for that video, what we're going to do is we're going to choose, we have the cinematic intro here, but after the player has watched it once, I want to go ahead and disable that intro. I don't want him to see the intro every time he goes to the main menu, just the first time that he loads into the main menu. So that's what we'll be doing with this. And remember, when you get any value, the default is always going to be like the default of the category. So like for string, it's going to be blank. If you get an int and it doesn't exist, it's just going to be 0. If you get a float and it doesn't exist, it's just going to be 0. So you can always play around with it and check out what they do and stuff and have fun with it. You can do a lot of creative stuff if you use config files, and you can store a lot of interesting information. So with that, guys, I'm going to wrap up the episode here. I hope you guys enjoyed. I'll see you guys in the next one. Remember to leave a comment if there's anything you want to see in future episodes. Subscribe if you're not already subscribed, and leave a like on the video, guys. Have a good one, guys. Bye.